Hello and welcome to another exciting episode of the Super Kick Mania Pro Wrestling Podcast. I think we just had a little bit of a weird mix-up on the intro sequence there, so I do apologise. Got some buttons here, and if you heard this coming through, then I apologise. Let's just cool off the music there, since I will quit whilst I'm behind. And we're going to get straight into today's show. So this is the Super Kick Mania Pro Wrestling Podcast, and we are going to be talking about Goldberg. And it's amazing, for so many years people would say Goldberg, but if you say Goldberg, then absolutely I am quoting Big E Langston. And if you haven't seen it, if you don't know what I'm referring to, I suggest you check out the New Day podcasts, which might be called the New Day Pod, or Feel the Power, as I actually think off the top of my head it may be called, where Big E actually said that he wanted to face Goldberg. That was his dream match, and he said Goldberg in the way of Goldberg, which was very amusing to me. You should definitely check out that video clip of just when he's talking about wrestling Goldberg and clones of Goldberg and 3 Goldbergs. It's very, very entertaining. But the reason we're talking about Bill Goldberg today is because last night, at time of recording, Goldberg defeated Bray Wyatt to become the WWE Universal Champion at the Super Showdown event in Saudi Arabia, in Riyadh, I forget how it's pronounced. And lots of people are unhappy about this on the internet. And you can turn off momentarily, because I'm going to say I am not one of the people who are unhappy about this. So many people are, what? And now they're turning off their phones, they're throwing their Alexas out the window. They do not want to hear that Goldberg winning the Universal title was a good move in any way. Which, it's an amazing thing. One thing I'm going to talk about with this is, why isn't it a good move? So many people who are unhappy about these things say, well, that was a terrible booking idea, so the storyline hasn't gone the way you like it. But you forget, perhaps, that pro wrestling is supposed to be a sport. And there's lots of people out there who say it's performance art, and we're not going to get into that whole debate today. But it's a sport. Pro wrestling is a sport. Now, sometimes in sports, there are upsets. Look at Conor McGregor. I forget the name of the guy that he fought and won in 40 seconds. Sometimes this happens. That was Conor McGregor's UFC return match, I think last month, or the beginning of February, and he won in 40 seconds. So why shouldn't someone like a Bill Goldberg, who's had this reputation since he came into the industry, in that he is the type of performer, the type of wrestler that is going to win a quick, short, sharp match? If you get Goldberg into a long match, then you have a chance. That's always been the game plan, the idea for any of his opponents. So the idea is that Goldberg has just got such immense force that if he hits you, catches you with a spear, it is over that quickly. Now, there's plus points and bad points. I'm going to minus points, I should say, to the opposite of plus points. There's plus points and minus points, negative points, to Goldberg winning and the way it won and the match itself. But for this industry, which is meant to be a real sport, and even though we all know it isn't, it's still, that's how it's presented, and they can't get around that. That's what they're presenting. It makes sense. It makes sense from the history. It makes sense with what we saw happen, that Goldberg, he could chop down The Fiend if he hit 4 or 5 spears and a jackhammer. Now, I'm a fan of this, and I'll tell you why I'm a fan of it, and then I'm going to tell you why I didn't like it and what I think they should have done differently, and how things could be different in the future where it comes to Bill Goldberg and his booking and everything. But I'm a fan of this because as someone, I am 34 years young, so that might be older than several people out there, or it might be similar age to a lot of people that might listen to a pro wrestling podcast, because let's face it, people that listen to pro wrestling podcasts are probably pro wrestling super fans who have been fans for a long time and enjoy this kind of material. So, I've watched Goldberg since I was a little boy, and I saw him in WCW. I was there when I wasn't there, but I was watching live on Nitro. Not that it was live. Everything I'm saying is a bit bonkers, but anyway. I was watching when he became US champion. I was watching the pay-per-view, not the pay-per-view, it was on a Nitro when he defeated Hulk Hogan to become the WCW World Heavyweight Champion. I saw the streak, 183 wins or something like this. Maybe I'm muddling that up with 83 weeks, but some 180-odd winning streak. And he was really dominant. You saw Goldberg, and so many people say this, and it's true. You'd see him, and people would think, yeah, the rest of wrestling is fake, but that guy is legit. You knew that Goldberg could destroy people. You could see the strength. There was no one really like him before him. People often compared Bill Goldberg to Stone Cold Steve Austin because they wore black trunks, they had goatee beards, and they were bald. But when you looked at them side by side, which we didn't get to do until years later when Austin was no longer wrestling, but when you just looked at their images side by side, Goldberg was the bigger guy. Now, you knew Austin was a brawler, and that we knew from his Stunning Steve days that he was a more technically gifted wrestler than perhaps Goldberg was at the time. But, you looked at Goldberg and you thought, that is a big dude. And I suppose the only person that he was similar to at the time is there was the Warlord years earlier, who was that big muscle guy who had a similar frame to Goldberg, also bald and sort of fitted that mould. Later on you'd get, they'd try to repeat the Goldberg formula in WWE to mixed results. At first they tried to bring in Brock Lesnar, which to me was a failed attempt at Goldberg. I know that sounds crazy to say now, but excuse me, they gave him a winning streak and he had a similar frame, didn't have the same charisma, and Goldberg isn't great on the mic, but Lesnar, they literally didn't let speak on the mic for a very long time. And you'd get these short, sharp matches, and just like some people don't like Goldberg matches, I didn't like a lot of Lesnar matches because they weren't particularly competitive. But something that Lesnar proved when he then went to UFC is that, well, his matches probably aren't going to be competitive because he's going to go in there and dominate you, and that will be that. And that's realistic. And so Goldberg, he would dominate people in WCW. He came to WWE, and when he did come to WWE after WCW closed, and then it was closed for a year, and then he debuted and only stayed for 1 year, they tried to put him in longer matches. Now, a little bit of a longer match with The Rock, a little bit of a longer match with Jericho or Triple H, that was fine, but he didn't always need to be in longer matches because we wanted just to see Goldberg dominate. And then obviously he had a long time where he wasn't there. When he came back, though, in 2016, to me that was one of my favourite storylines, some of my favourite moments in pro wrestling history. Because one, I loved the nostalgia of him coming back. I loved the feel-good story that, perhaps he hadn't had the best ending to his story before, but it wasn't the end, it was just the end of that chapter, and he wrote this new chapter where he came back and he cut this promo, and how scripted or not, I'm not sure, but everyone was on his side, and you could see that it meant so much to him, and he wanted to wrestle in front of his son and all this stuff. And he even said in that promo when he came back that, Brock Lesnar, you're last, as my American listeners will understand that word, you're last. And so it wasn't that Brock was last. Goldberg had that match, won in 90 seconds, and I'd love to know why that happened, because apparently there was talk that Brock was going to get his win back after their previous match, WrestleMania 20, and they decided, oh, actually, Goldberg's getting a good response, let's have Goldberg stick around. So at some point, obviously it was changed to Goldberg's going to win in 90 seconds. But obviously that wasn't going to be the plan, that Brock would have won in 90 seconds, because Goldberg would have come back, lost in 90 seconds, and seemed like a fool. But instead, by making Brock look like a fool, it was like, oh my god, Goldberg still has it. This is unbelievable. He just did something incredible. And then it became apparent after that perhaps Goldberg couldn't really go. So I think I'm correct in saying he was in the Royal Rumble. He didn't win, but he was in the Royal Rumble, I think, for a few minutes, and that was fine. Then he had a match with Kevin Owens, where Kevin Owens, and this is something you notice in Goldberg matches, his opponent will like get out the ring, stare down. We had this at Super Showdown last night, where Bray Wyatt and him had a stare down, and this is after the bell rang. So the clock is ticking, and it's not like, well, it was another 90-second match, because it wasn't a 90-second match. It was a perhaps 5-minute match, but some of that was used up on the stare down. And so anyway, we're going back to Kevin Owens. I'll come back to Bray in a moment. Kevin Owens got out the ring, delayed some time. When eventually he got in, spear, jackhammer, and that was it. And there may have been one or two other moves, but it was literally that quick, and Kevin Owens was clearly embarrassed. I don't mean him personally, although he probably was, but just in terms of his career, that was an embarrassment. He was just destroyed by Goldberg. Goldberg became Universal Champion, and then just under a month later, he wrestled Brock again at WrestleMania. And I don't think they booked this right, just because even though it was a good match, it was a good Goldberg match, and it was frankly a good Brock match. And to see these guys, they said it's not going to be pretty, it's just going to be two big guys smashing each other, and that's exactly what it was. We saw that Goldberg could go longer, and even then it wasn't, I don't even think it was a 10-minute match. They threw each other about, and perhaps Goldberg, felt like, right, we've got to get to Mania, so I don't want to get an injury before that point. And I think he may have even got a little bit of an injury before the Survivor Series match, hence why, now I think of it, they may have made that a bit of a shorter match. But Goldberg lost, and I don't think they booked that quite right, because he hit the spear straight away, and it's like, I'm going to repeat it, but then Brock kicked out, and it was making Brock come across like the babyface, who was the underdog. And so the next night when Goldberg came out and people weren't the most receptive to him, you could see Goldberg's an emotional guy, and he kind of responded, well, I didn't do this for you, I did it for my son. And that's, it wasn't ideal, because just like they've often done with Roman Reigns, they book Goldberg there where it's like, well, the audience are going to turn on you because you're booking them as a coward or as a heel, or making the heel seem like the babyface or the sympathetic character. But anyway, so Goldberg came back. He had his match with Lesnar, Royal Rumble, Kevin Owens fight, became Universal Champion, did the favour, returned back to Brock, and that was the end of his story. The next year he went into the Hall of Fame, and that was that. But then obviously Saudi Arabia came along with their $1 billion deal for 5 years for 2 shows a year. And we started getting things like The Undertaker and Kane, and teaming up against Triple H, and the return of Shawn Michaels, and Hulk Hogan going out over there, and lots of things where people were coming back from the past to get a huge paycheck and not looking the best in the ring. And then it was Goldberg's turn. And Goldberg wrestled The Undertaker, and it was a dream match, and it was a dream match. When I heard that Goldberg was coming back, again, I'm a big Goldberg fan, and him coming back against The Undertaker, it's like, oh my god, I definitely want to see this. And I thought it was a decent match for the, what was surprising is that they had a several-minute match. And Goldberg hadn't had several-minute matches other than his WrestleMania match with Brock. But now he's doing a several-minute match with The Undertaker. Clearly, they both wanted this and wanted it to be something special. But I think the story goes that Goldberg, once again, even though he'd cut himself when he was going to go against Kevin Owens or Brock or whatever, banging his head before coming out to the ring, he did it again and knocked himself silly, because he's older and shouldn't be headbutting doors to get himself psyched up. It's a mistake to do. So he headbutted a door, he came out, and I think if you watch that match with The Undertaker, he was really slow to come out. There was a delay, and maybe it's because he'd knocked himself senseless backstage. But anyway, he went out, he wasn't himself. Undertaker wasn't the man he used to be, as we'd already seen with his 2-minute squash match against John Cena at WrestleMania that year, or the year before, in fact, 2 years ago. And so Goldberg dropped Undertaker on his head. Undertaker dropped Goldberg on his head, and when I think he botched the tombstone, which again may have been Goldberg's fault because he didn't get a good grip, but then Undertaker should have done something about that, and he tombstoned him, really crunched his neck, and Undertaker looked so unhappy at the conclusion of that match, even though he won. He knew that it had not been a good night at the office. Now, I think Goldberg probably went to the WWE and said, look, that was a bad night at the office. It was 100 degrees to wrestling in Saudi Arabia. We're both over 50. Don't let that be my last match. And I'm sure they gave him a lot of money still, but there may have even been an aspect of, look, I'll give you a free match. Just give me something to redeem that. And so the story goes that Paul Heyman, who has done a lot to work with Goldberg, just like he's done a lot to work with Lesnar, saw Goldberg as a special project, kind of like the Bruno Sammartino past his glory days, to come back every so often and be a hero and wrestle like a villain. And so they had Goldberg against Dolph Ziggler at SummerSlam last year. And the sense in this is like, okay, so Dolph Ziggler can sell like no one else can. That's like the thing he will go down in history for, is how well he sells injuries, sells moves. And Goldberg, can pick up and throw around Dolph Ziggler because he's a much smaller guy. And, Ziggler himself, 2-time former world champion, so this is credible threat for Goldberg. But then Goldberg obliterated him, spear, jackhammer, pin, and then he goes to leave, Ziggler calls him out, comes back another spear, goes to leave, Ziggler calls him out, Goldberg's like, you got hot, kid, taps him on the back, but then gives him one more spear and leaves. And that's it. And I think we saw some stuff on Twitter that Ziggler felt like, yeah, well, I did the job, but I just did what I was told. I wasn't happy about this match. But then we saw that they perhaps were both in the same restaurant at the same time, so they just had someone film something on a mobile where they were getting back into it, just for the fun of it. Nothing more came of it. And it's like, okay, so we now get the sense that Goldberg may come back every so often. I don't think we ever thought that was going to be it, but I suppose if that was it for Goldberg, then, yeah, he looked dominant in his last match against Dolph Ziggler. And then suddenly, a few weeks ago, it's like Goldberg said, well, I saw the Royal Rumble and I saw The Fiend, and I never got a rematch for the Universal title after losing to Brock. So now I want a rematch, and The Fiend, you're next. And that was going to be at Super Showdown in Saudi Arabia, once again. That's the best place to get that big money. And the ratings did really well. The ratings for Goldberg coming back got some hype, and it did well. And they were like, Attitude Era, this seemed to work. So even though he was WCW side of things, he's someone so many fans from 20 years ago still remember, still care about, still love. And so Goldberg helped their rating, and if they're on Fox Network now and their ratings haven't been as spectacular, but Goldberg coming back helps, and then they could have Hulk Hogan the next week, and The Undertaker and John Cena and all these people. They're trying to make the Fox deal with SmackDown work and justifiable for the $1 billion they've got for that as well. Then, right, well, Fiend hasn't got his ratings. He gets a lot of internet chat on Twitter and Facebook, I'm sure, where people are intrigued by this character. But then his matches against Seth Rollins, they weren't great. His match against Daniel Bryan wasn't great. His match against The Miz wasn't great. None of them were bad, but none of them were great. He was a little bit similar to someone like Goldberg or to Brock Lesnar. And it's interesting how they've realised with some wrestlers, you don't need to see them all the time. Some wrestlers are more special if they don't wrestle every week. And the Fiend character is one of those. And once again, it's not that they have the best matches. And it comes back to what I started saying at the beginning here, that this is meant to be a real sport. And even though the Fiend is like The Undertaker in that he has mystical powers and can teleport and can't be hurt and all nonsense like this, it's still the case that, well, if this guy is inhuman, and can't be injured, doesn't feel pain, then that makes sense why it doesn't matter that he's not the most technical wrestler or the high-flying wrestler. He's just that tough, and that you can believe. And so Bray keeps winning. But then you put him against someone else who's also like that, who's so tough, has short, sharp matches, just destroys someone, like Bill Goldberg, and it's going to be a short match. Either The Fiend is going to destroy Goldberg, or Goldberg is going to destroy The Fiend. Now, the rumours had been that The Fiend was going to go against Roman Reigns at WrestleMania. And Roman, he was the world champion, or universal champion. He was diagnosed with cancer, I think leukemia, and had to relinquish the title. Months later, or however long it was, he came back, and now he's been back just under a year, but he has never gone for the world title again, and the rumour is that he will be the challenger for the world title at WrestleMania to go against The Fiend, and so he could then be the person to defeat The Fiend, after Daniel Bryan, Miz, Seth Rollins couldn't. But then the Goldberg thing happened, and they're like, well, hang on a second. Roman Reigns does a spear. Goldberg does a spear. And for those of you who remember when Goldberg was inducted into the Hall of Fame, he said about the spear, and he sort of mentioned about, there's so many guys that don't do a good job with it. Hi, Roman, or something like that, he said. And everyone was like, oh, you just went there, you know. He took a little dig at Roman Reigns, who also uses the spear. And if they're smart, and Roman Reigns is the number one contender, which isn't confirmed but is predicted, so that it's Goldberg versus Roman, they can play that clip where Goldberg, 2 years ago, when he was being inducted into the Hall of Fame, took a dig at Roman Reigns and the spear, and then it's spear versus spear. And there could be another passing of the torch moment, just as the big dog, Roman Reigns, beats the dead man Undertaker for his second loss at WrestleMania. It could now be that he does it, you know, because when people have their CVs, their accolades, their championship reigns, the ticks next to their names, not all of them are just championship belts and world titles and so on and so forth, King of the Rings. There will be things, like King of the Rings, like Royal Rumbles, like someone defeated the streak, like this person slammed Yokozuna, or this person slammed Andre the Giant, or whatever. There are other things which are career highlights other than just winning belts. And Roman Reigns, he's been a multi-time world universal champion, won other titles, but if he also is the guy that beat Undertaker at WrestleMania, and he's also the guy that defeated Goldberg at WrestleMania, and there was a passing of the torch where you're the new King of the Spears and you're like the new Goldberg, you know, who's next? You know, imagine the night after WrestleMania, Roman Reigns has won the Universal title and Goldberg comes out and it's like, there's going to be a rematch, and then Goldberg retires. Or even if he doesn't retire, it's like, you know, Roman, you know, there's going to be a reason why we're going to be tag team partners, because when I say who's next, I usually mean who's next that I'm going to defeat. But when I say Roman Reigns, you're next, is that you are the next big thing. You know, and that would have been a better phrase coming from Brock, I admit, because that was his nickname back in the day, the next big thing. But that kind of thing would make complete sense. They could do that, and then Goldberg has helped solidify and make Roman Reigns a bigger star. Now, the last thing I'm going to come on to on this show is talking about what they did wrong. You know, this is what everyone's waiting to hear, but what did they do wrong in the match with Bray Wyatt, which applies to what they did wrong in the match with Kevin Owens, and it's what they can avoid doing wrong in a match at WrestleMania against Roman Reigns or whoever Goldberg defends the Universal title against. And let's look at the match last night. Goldberg, I think, hit 4 spears, a jackhammer, which was weak, but when you look up the list of Universal Champions, Bray Wyatt is listed as the heaviest. So when Goldberg struggled to do a jackhammer on The Undertaker, when he struggled to do a jackhammer on Bray Wyatt, it's because they're big guys, but he didn't struggle to do it on Dolph Ziggler. So Roman Reigns isn't as big as Bray Wyatt, and he had to do his jackhammer because it's his finisher. So it didn't look the greatest, and I get that, but he won't have that same problem again next time, probably. And what else he did? 4 spears, a jackhammer, and then there was a headbutt and I think a knee that he did. And it was a 5-minute match. Bray Wyatt he locked in the mandible claw twice, and that was literally it. And yet it was a 5-minute match. They started off with a stare down, and then Bray Wyatt took his jacket off. And this is just eating up time, and it's the same thing they did with Kevin Owens, where just a certain amount of time needed eating up with Owens getting out the ring, just so it wasn't a 90-second match. Now, I'm going to tell you a bunch of things that they could do so that, one, they could have avoided this last night, could have avoided it with Kevin Owens a couple of years back, and how they can avoid it with Roman Reigns. And I'm going to give one other slightly off-point example just to demonstrate this thought. Bret Hart. When Bret Hart came back and wrestled Vince McMahon at WrestleMania, it was by far the worst Bret Hart match that ever happened. And people say, well, what did you expect? Bret Hart, he's had a stroke, he's retired, he's had concussions. McMahon isn't, young by this stage himself. It wasn't going to be a classic. But when you watch that, Bret Hart does some punches, he does some stomps, he eventually does the sharpshooter. He might have raked Vince McMahon's eyes. I forget, because I watched that match, I think, precisely once. But it was a terrible match. Later on in the summer, when Bret Hart won the US title and was in the 10-man tag team match against the Nexus versus Team WWE, he did, I think, atomic drop and a Russian leg sweep and couple of other moves. And it's like, obviously he felt confident he could do a little bit more. Then he got himself disqualified because clearly he couldn't go for very long. He did some token things, but it was more impressive than what he'd done at WrestleMania. So let's talk about what Goldberg can do, what he can't do, and how you could build a really good 5, 10, 15-minute Goldberg match. Now, surely Goldberg is physically well enough to be in the ring. You see him hit the spear on The Fiend on SmackDown last week, and he was covered in sweat from one move. If they're worried that literally this guy's going to have a heart attack and it'll be like another Ultimate Warrior situation and touch wood and, I pray to God something like that doesn't happen, then he shouldn't be in the ring. But if he can physically do a workout for 20 minutes, then he should be able to do a match for 5 where it's got more variety than what he did. So he could save the spear. He doesn't just have to hit a spear straight away. You think if the two wrestlers locked up, even if it's The Fiend, it could be that he gets into a lock-up and he pushes The Fiend down. The Fiend gets straight back up. If it's Roman Reigns, then they could lock up and then you could end up into like a test of strength. And Roman Reigns is like the younger guy, and Goldberg, back in the day, everyone would have expected Goldberg to be more powerful. So perhaps it's that Goldberg wins the test of strength, shoves him down. Yeah, you're next. Then Roman Reigns gets up, he locks up, then Roman Reigns pushes him down. And this is the same as a stare down, because they don't actually have to be doing too much to do a lock-up. They really don't. You just fake it to make it. That's what pro wrestling is. And then, whether it's The Fiend or Roman, whoever the Goldberg opponent is, it could be that, they bounce Goldberg off the ropes and grab him, put him in a headlock. And Goldberg could then charge them into the corner. You could then go up into the corner and then 1, 2, 3, 4, up to 10 punches to the face. Does Goldberg usually do that? No, but wrestlers have to adapt and change their style. Does Matt Hardy do as many flying things as he used to? No. Does AJ Styles do as many high-flying things as he used to? No. Does Chris Jericho? No. Not that Jericho did tons, but their styles have changed as they've got older. They wrestle smarter. So could Goldberg. And that doesn't mean that, less high-flying when he never did high-flying, but he could just go into the corner and do some punches. And from there, his opponent perhaps could, if it's The Fiend, especially a heel, could give him a low blow. Goldberg could crumple to the ground. Then they could put him into a leg lock of some kind, start working Goldberg's knee. That way Goldberg has the excuse, he doesn't have to run around. Goldberg does have 1 or 2 submission holds, like a knee lock or something, or an armbar of some description, could reverse it into that. And again, it could be that the opponent can't get to the ropes, and then the Fiend, say again a heel, could reach across, rake Goldberg's eyes. Goldberg could fall to the outside, then the opponent could follow Goldberg to the outside. There could be a sense of going to throw Goldberg into the turnbuckle, and the ring post on the outside. Goldberg reverses it, puts them into it, but because he's been raked in the eyes, he's still holding his eyes. His vision is impaired. And Goldberg could get back into the ring, and he could be chased into the ring by Roman or the Fiend or whoever his opponent is, Kevin Owens. This all would have worked for them. And Goldberg could get up, and there could be like a thing where they just hit Goldberg down, bounce him off the ropes. Goldberg, instead of hitting the spear, he hits a clothesline. It might be that he goes for a spear, but they move, and Goldberg doesn't then have to smash into a turnbuckle. It could just be that he moves and he catches himself. They turn around, and then there's a double clothesline. You know, it's a bump, yeah, but it's not the biggest bump. You're not doing a swanton dive, right? So there's a double clothesline. They both go down. What other moves could Goldberg do? They get up. His opponent puts Goldberg into a headlock. Goldberg literally grabs the arm, powers out, puts him into an armbar. From the armbar, hooks around their head, puts him into a full Nelson. Again, a great move that I could do. I have sometimes thought, if I needed to have a wrestling match, I probably never will have a wrestling match. I'd have to get into much better shape just not to be gassed out, but also I don't have the build of a professional wrestler. Maybe some wrestlers I do that you see in the indies, or even some of the smaller guys. I've got a better build than Marco Stunt, not to have a dig at Marco Stunt, but if I had to have a wrestling match, I don't have the athleticism of Marco Stunt, but I'm just saying, if I had to have a match, I've sometimes thought, what moves can I do? And I know, and people might say they look terrible, they don't look convincing, but if you don't know this, I am an actor. I have trained in stage combat, and I can tell you it is very, very different than professional wrestling. Professional wrestling, sometimes you'll see them stamp their foot, but you don't stamp. I'm going to talk about this on an episode of the podcast in the future because it'll be interesting. But in stage combat, you don't stamp your foot. You have a whole different other ways of missing moves, selling moves, making it that strikes and things don't touch but sound like they've touched by sound effects that you make by clapping and napping and stuff like this. But anyway, and when I say napping, that's the technical term. I don't mean sleeping. But anyway, what moves could I do? I know that I could do a full Nelson. I know that I could do a headlock. I know that I could do $1 Million Dream. I know I could put someone in a sharpshooter or a figure 4 leg lock or a Texas Cloverleaf or most submission holds. Submission hold I couldn't do is like the surfboard move, maybe called an Indian Deathlock as well. I'm not sure. I might be muddling that up. Definitely a surfboard where you grab their arms and legs hooked around your legs around their calves, and then you grab their arms backwards and suspend them up because you've got to hold their weight. I couldn't do that. I'm sure Goldberg could, and it'd be like, oh my god, Goldberg, he's been training in MMA, he's got all of these striking moves, but he's also got some submission moves. Imagine if Goldberg suddenly put someone into like a camel clutch or something, if he's got them like the Steiner recliner, like I say, the camel clutch. Goldberg could put someone in that. There's a reason why Scott Steiner started using the Steiner recliner, because he couldn't regularly, and for years and years, almost never did the Frankensteiner. But he could do a Steiner recliner because he adapted his style. He'd got a much bigger frame, he was getting older, he was less agile to be doing standing leaps up to put you in a Frankensteiner, but he could do that, and it made sense because he's so big and strong, he can just lock you in a hold and hold you there. Goldberg could do any of these submission moves. What other moves could I do? And if I could do them, Goldberg could do them. You've got punches, you've got kicks, you've got knees. I'm sure he could do a body slam, because you don't need to get Bray Wyatt up to suplex level, vertical suplex level to do a jackhammer. If you've just done a body slam, he could do an elbow drop. He could, hell, like you could, imagine if Goldberg hit someone with a pedigree. You're not going to do a tombstone, but you could put someone in like a move. It's like, oh my god, Goldberg's doing a pedigree, and then everyone would be talking about, oh, what's Triple H going to react to this? It's something else you could do, which would get a lot of hype. Goldberg, if he could, a leg drop, I could do a leg drop. You could do just a splash, like the Ultimate Warrior would do a splash. There's loads and loads of things that Goldberg could do. But so much of what Goldberg would have to do would just be to back Roman Reigns or Bray Wyatt up into the corner and just be like, bam, 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 like punch, elbow, uppercut, just really pummeling him. The referee gets in like no closed fists. Goldberg's then frustrated. And then you think, years and years ago, Crush, Bryan Adams, he would do his finishing move where he'd just, the Kona Crush I think it was called, he'd put his hands around someone's temples and just squeeze in. Imagine if Goldberg suddenly did that, and again going back to what Crush would do, a heart punch, he could just punch someone in the heart. Loads of things which would be like, Goldberg is like an utter beast. And most of what I've said is, so there's a body slam, and it might be that he doesn't want to do tons of lifting moves. And I said, he could do like a splash. And I just mean a splash off the ropes, not off the top rope. Just bounce off the rope and do a splash. And an elbow drop. And if it's that he doesn't want to even take those kind of bumps, if it'll, gas him out too quickly, then don't do it. But the point is, I'm not suddenly saying Goldberg should have a 20-minute classic. In a 5-minute match where Goldberg hit 4 spears, a headbutt, a knee, and a jackhammer. If literally that was the variety, I would say, so 4 spears, 1 jackhammer, 1 knee, 1 headbutt. That's 7 moves. If I'm only allowed to let Goldberg do 7 moves, I would have him hit 1 spear, and that gives me 3 different moves to get him to do something. And for those 3 different moves, I'm going to give him a power slam. So, like you'll often see Dustin Rhodes do, or Cody Rhodes does it as well, do a power slam, because it's a big power move. And mostly you're just taking your opponent's momentum, swinging round, slam, done. And then I would like to choose that Goldberg put Bray Wyatt into a full Nelson. People say about, the master lock or whatever, but just put him in a full Nelson. And one other move, what would I like to have seen Goldberg do? Have Goldberg put Bray Wyatt into a camel clutch, Steiner recliner. And with this, people say, well, how is he going to get into these things? You might have needed some other moves. So if it's literally that he's just going to power out of something, reverse out of something, knock Bray Wyatt down with another headbutt, from the headbutt into the Steiner recliner, Bray Wyatt manages to power out because he's not human, gets Goldberg into the mandible claw. Point is, because there's not a restriction to 7 moves, there could have been 25 moves in that match within the same length of time, and it would have seemed such a better match for it, a much richer match. If Goldberg has a 5-minute time limit for his matches, you could pack a lot more in. And the thing about a Steiner recliner, the thing about a sleeper hold, a $1 Million Dream, these are rest moves. So if Goldberg has The Fiend or Roman Reigns in a full Nelson, they're both just resting. There's no problem there. So this is why I say that it's not a problem that Goldberg is the world champion, the universal champion, and that he's going to go against Roman Reigns. Because if they're smart, which evidence suggested they're not always smart, they could make Goldberg still seem really viable in the ring. Yeah, his matches will be short, but there's lots of variety he could still do where people would actually be like, look at Goldberg, he's got so much more, and he's adapted his style, and he's better than ever. And people would say, back in the day, he was just like an absolute powerhouse, and he's still clearly a powerhouse, but now he's smarter too, he'll out-wrestle you. So that's my thoughts anyway. I'm really pleased. Congratulations to Bill Goldberg for becoming the Universal Champion, just because historically I think that it's good, it's right that now Goldberg is a 4-time World Champion. So Goldberg was a WCW champion, then he had a short WWE World Heavyweight Championship reign, which was itself the successor to the WCW title. And then he left, and that would have been it. He came back, got the Universal title, people complained about the whole Kevin Owens thing, had a decent match with Brock, lost it. It was the nostalgia thing that he came back, but that wasn't it either. And now he's come back and he's done it again. And so in the history books, he's now a multi-time world champion, more than he was before. He's the first Hall of Famer to win a World's Championship after going into the Hall of Fame, and I think this is something special. It's something which, at the time and when you watched it, it may not have been the greatest match, but when we look back about it and we talk about the statistics and facts of Goldberg, and he's a 4-time world champion, and that his career wasn't just from 1997 or 96, whenever it started, to 2001 or 2004, I think WrestleMania 20 was. That it's like, well, no, he had a long time where he was retired or inactive, but then he came back, and then you saw him sporadically, but he came back again, and within those times when he came back, he won 2 world titles. Because you look at Shawn Michaels came back and he won a world title, but after that he never won it again, and there is something that's a shame about that. He should have been world champion more times within his second run after the back injury. And now Goldberg has done that, and he doesn't have that much longer left in the ring. He might still make an appearance over the next 2 or 3 years, but he's not going to keep doing this because he won't be able to look like Goldberg for that much longer. But anyway, I digress. Congratulations to Bill Goldberg, big fan, and I'm pleased about this. And Bray Wyatt is going to be fine, because The Undertaker, he beat Hulk Hogan for the world title, lost it a week later or something, and that was at the end of 1991. He then didn't become world champion again until 1997. And look at The Undertaker's career and records and history now. Bray Wyatt, he's only been the Fiend for less than a year. He's going to be fine, because this character is really good, and as long as they don't ruin the character, it doesn't matter that he lost this match. But anyway, so this has been the Superkick Mania Pro Wrestling Podcast. It's still slightly irregular, but I had to make this episode happen just because of Goldberg, because of The Fiend, and what it's going to mean for the WrestleMania main event for the Universal title. My name is David Postansky. This is part of the Extreme Improv Pro podcast network, so check out all of our other Extreme Improv podcasts. We've got the Mega Movie podcast, the Games Monster podcast, the Extreme Improv podcast, Radio Rumble, and so much more. Till next time, thank you very much. Bye, Ziz!